Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to disenfranchise voters, and conspiring and attempting to obstruct an official proceeding. The indictment was issued by a grand jury of citizens here in the District of Columbia, and it sets forth the crimes charged in detail. I encourage everyone to read it in full. The attack on our nation's capital on January 6, 2021, was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election. The men and women of law enforcement who defended the U.S. Capitol on January 6th are heroes. They are patriots and they are the very best of us. They did not just defend a building or the people sheltering in it. They put their lives on the line to defend who we are as a country and as a people. They defended the very institutions and principles that define the United States. Since the attack on our Capitol, the Department of Justice has remained committed to ensuring accountability for those criminally responsible for what happened that day. This case is brought consistent with that commitment, and our investigation of other individuals continues.
I want to start today by saying this plainly, because there's no other honest way to frame it. Jack Smith didn't come back into the spotlight by accident. He came back because the truth has a way of forcing itself into rooms where certain people would very much prefer silence. And that's exactly what we saw unfold when House Republicans thought they could drag the special counsel behind closed doors, shut off the cameras, and control the narrative. What they didn't count on was the fact that Jack Smith doesn't need a microphone to be heard. The facts do the talking for him. I'm speaking directly to you now, not as a detached observer, not as someone reading a press release, but as someone who's watched this story evolve in real time and understands exactly why today mattered. Because what happened wasn't just a deposition. It wasn't just congressional theater. It was another moment where the attempt to bury accountability ended up amplifying it instead. By the way, I am trying to do my best to gather all the information I can for you and share it with you. Please leave your likes and comments, and I would be grateful if you subscribed. Let's continue. The plan was simple. Keep it private, keep it quiet. Don't let the American people hear from the man who led the prosecutions of Donald Trump. Don't let him explain, in his own words, what his investigation uncovered. Don't let him remind the country what the evidence actually shows. But that plan collapsed almost immediately because Jack Smith delivered an opening statement. And thanks to reporting that followed, we now know exactly what he told that room. And let me tell you something. From that moment on, it only got worse for Donald Trump. According to the reporting, Jack Smith laid it out in stark, unmistakable terms. He said his investigation developed proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump engaged in a criminal scheme to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election and block the lawful transfer of power. Not suspicion, not inference. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That phrase matters more than a lot of people realize, and I want to slow this down for a second so you understand just how devastating that statement actually is. In the American legal system, prosecutors don't need proof beyond a reasonable doubt to bring charges. They need probable cause. They need enough evidence to believe a crime was committed and that the defendant committed it. That's the standard for an indictment. Beyond a reasonable doubt is the standard at trial. It's the highest bar there is. And Jack Smith stood there and said, essentially, we cleared a bar higher than we even needed to clear just to bring the case. That's not chest thumping. That's not political spin. That's a prosecutor telling you the evidence is overwhelming. And he didn't stop there. Smith went on to explain that his team also uncovered powerful evidence showing that Trump willfully retained highly classified documents after leaving office in January 2021. Not accidentally, not carelessly, willfully. And where were those documents stored? At Mar-a-Lago, in places where guests and events took place, in a ballroom, in a bathroom, in unsecured areas of a private social club Let that sink in. Classified documents, some of the most sensitive materials in the possession of the United States government, stored next to wedding receptions and cocktail parties. And this wasn't speculation. This wasn't rumor. This was evidence developed by a special counsel operating under Department of Justice rules and grand jury oversight. Now remember, we don't have video of this opening statement because Republicans made sure of that. They didn't want you to hear Jack Smith explain this himself. They didn't want his words circulating freely. They didn't want the clarity. They didn't want the authority that comes from a career prosecutor calmly laying out what his investigation found. But even without the video, the message came through loud and clear. Smith also addressed what happened after January 6th, and this part is critical. He explained that after the violence at the Capitol, Trump and his associates didn't recoil in horror. They didn't pull back. They exploited it. They used the chaos as leverage. They called members of Congress, urging them to further delay the certification of the election. This is where the so-called No Arctic Hazes investigation comes in. No wiretaps, no illegal surveillance, just phone records, billing data, who called whom and when. And Jack Smith made a point that should make every single member of Congress sit uncomfortably in their chair. He said, "I didn't choose the members who were called. President Trump did." That's not just damning, that's surgical. It removes the ability to hide behind coincidence or coincidence narratives. Trump made those calls. Trump targeted those lawmakers. Trump pushed the scheme forward even after violence had already erupted. And if any of this sounds familiar, it should. Because we've heard Jack Smith speak publicly before. We heard him when he announced the indictment. And I want you to remember the tone he used then, because it's exactly the same tone he's using now. Calm, methodical, unflinching. When Smith announced the indictment, he didn't rant. He didn't posture. He said Donald Trump was charged with conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to disenfranchise voters, and conspiring to obstruct an official proceeding. He reminded the country that January 6th was an unprecedented assault on American democracy, fueled by lies told to obstruct a core function of government, counting and certifying an election. He praised law enforcement officers who defended the Capitol, calling them patriots who put their lives on the line to defend the institutions that define who we are as a nation. And he made it clear that accountability wasn't optional. It was the mission. That wasn't politics. That was prosecutorial integrity. And when critics tried to claim that Smith was acting out of partisan motivation, he addressed that too, months ago, when he spoke about the role of politics in prosecution. He said the idea that politics drives cases like this is absurd. He talked about working under Republican and Democratic administrations. He talked about being an acting U.S. attorney during Trump's own presidency. He explained that you don't throw out the rules because you want a certain outcome. You follow the rules precisely so the outcome has legitimacy. And then he said something that should resonate with anyone who claims to care about democracy. The real problem isn't prosecuting powerful people when they break the law. The real problem is retaliation, the attempt to punish prosecutors for doing their jobs, which brings me to what happened next. Jamie Raskin, the ranking Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, came out afterward and said the quiet part out loud. He said that the decision not to let Jack Smith testify publicly was an excellent decision for Republicans, because if Smith had testified in front of cameras, it would have been devastating to Trump and everyone involved in the January 6th insurrection. Raskin explained that Smith spent hours walking the committee through the professional and ethical duties of a prosecutor. He described him as honorable, disciplined, and exactly the kind of public servant the country should want. And when asked whether Smith disclosed any conclusions beyond what was already public, Raskin made it clear. Smith answered every question thoroughly and responsibly. His report speaks for itself. And here's another key point Raskin raised that deserves more attention than it's getting. Every other special counsel has testified publicly. Robert Mueller did. Robert Hur did. Independent counsels have done it. But Jack Smith, his second report dealing with classified documents is still being held back. And that, as Raskin put it, is aberrational. Now let's be honest about what's happening here. Donald Trump and his allies want Jack Smith prosecuted, investigated, punished, not because he broke the law, but because he enforced it. And that tells you everything you need to know. If a Democrat had done even half of what Trump is accused of doing, there would be bipartisan agreement that prosecution was necessary. There would be no talk of witch hunts. There would be no cries of victimhood. Accountability would be the baseline expectation. What we're watching now is the emergence of two competing media strategies. On one side, you have House Republicans trying to drip out information selectively. They may release transcripts eventually. They may bury them in document dumps. They will avoid video. They will avoid context. They will hope the public doesn't read closely. On the other side, you have Jack Smith and the legal record, court filings, indictments, reports, evidence, and a growing recognition that hiding this story isn't working. The American people aren't confused about who Donald Trump is. They know he's a convicted felon. They know he spent years trying to evade accountability. They know he continues to operate in shadows, deflecting, delaying, and distracting. Trump's media blitz, the glossy interviews, the speeches about supposed economic achievements, the threats, the bluster, the constant attempt to reframe himself as a victim of persecution, it's all designed to drown out one thing, the facts. And every time Jack Smith re-enters the conversation, those facts snap back into focus. This wasn't supposed to go like this for Trump. The closed-door strategy was supposed to starve the story. Instead, it revived it. Because Jack Smith isn't some rogue actor. He's not a partisan operative. He's a career prosecutor doing exactly what the law requires without fear or favor. And the contrast couldn't be sharper. On one side, you have Jack Smith, disciplined, restrained, committed to the rule of law, operating within institutional norms, respecting the courts, respecting the process. On the other side, you have a political movement that has tried to turn the Department of Justice into a personal shield and a personal weapon, depending on convenience. There was a time when the Department of Justice took pride in its independence, when its credibility mattered, when its leaders understood that their legitimacy came from consistency, not loyalty to one man. That reputation didn't erode on its own. It was attacked. It was undermined. It was corrupted by those who saw the law not as a standard to uphold, but as an obstacle to be crushed. And that's why moments like this matter, not because they're flashy, not because they're dramatic, but because they remind us what accountability actually looks like. So yes, we're going to keep following this. We're going to keep talking about what Jack Smith uncovered, what Republicans are trying to hide, and what the evidence shows. Because democracy doesn't defend itself. It requires people to pay attention, to ask questions, and to refuse to accept silence as an answer. And that's exactly what I plan to keep doing right here.